Welcome to the Cowtown Cats Lacrosse Podcast, where we talk all things Panther City Lacrosse Club. Now here are your hosts, Nicholas and Andy.
While we did have a good idea of who Panther City might go against in the playoffs, we had to wait one last week to make sure. Welcome everyone to the Cowtown Cats Lacrosse Podcast. I'm Nicholas, joined by Andy.
Hello.
Coming into the last week of the NLL season, the 3 spot for us seemed pretty secure, but there were some chances that things could be switched around, especially with San Diego and Colorado going against each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Had Colorado won that game, then they would have record-wise been tied with us, and because they owned the season series tiebreaker 2-1, they would have leapfrogged us into that 3 spot and then faced the second-seeded Calgary Roughnecks, whereas we would have faced San Diego, who we have not beaten yet this season.
Right, and even Panther City, they put out a poll on Instagram like who would you like us to rather face, and I think it was pretty close, but I think Calgary still came ahead on that on who we'd rather go against, and so everything kind of fell into the right where we thought it would fall, pretty much, where San Diego got the win. They secure the number 1 spot. Calgary's at number 2. We're at number 3, and Colorado, locking up that playoff spot a few weeks ago, ends up at number 4. But even for the last game of the season, it was still a pretty close game for Colorado and San Diego.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's funny. I turned it off at halftime, since at that point I thought, okay, San Diego's. It seems like they were resting a few key guys, but were otherwise taking care of business and wanted to show out in front of their home fans. However, I turned it on with maybe 4 minutes left in the fourth quarter, and it's like, oh my gosh, Colorado's keeps chipping away. And they definitely showed their mettle and why they won the title last year and were able to beat not just San Diego, but also Calgary, both higher seeds en route to their title.
That just kind of goes to show you, even in the last weeks of the year, teams are still fighting hard. Even us in our game against Calgary in that last week, it was close, but I mean, we wanted to prove a point, and I think we pretty much did that. But we kind of knew going into that last home game with Panther City that there was a good chance we were going against Calgary, and our opponent is set. It is the Calgary Roughnecks. That game is set for this upcoming Saturday night. Yeah. 3rd time's a charm in 5 weeks?
Yeah, and I actually like that we've faced them this much so early, because one thing that you'll hear talking heads say regarding the NLL, it's hard to go undefeated against a team during a season, and so a law of averages says we're theoretically due for a win against the Roughnecks.
Well, yeah, and so just kind of obviously them being a familiar opponent, especially the last few weeks, looking back at the last 2 games we had against them, it almost felt like 2 different games. Obviously, in Calgary, and Calgary was riding pretty strong. Then they kind of beat us pretty bad that time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The offense was really sloppy that game, and while we were able to limit their transition opportunities, their 5-on-5 guys killed us. Now, that wasn't the case in the game we played them against a week ago, so it was nice to see growth on our end in terms of coaching, in terms of game planning. So you hope that this 3rd time's the charm when we face them.
Well, and speaking of changes between that first game and the second game, one thing we talked about last week, the defense, not even the defense as a whole, but Daymud especially, he did have that rough start in Calgary, got pulled, and he was able to kind of get his redemption last game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he definitely did a great job in that first quarter and first half overall, limiting them to 5 goals. Now, you basically have to hope that he can duplicate that, or not remember the second half as much for this game coming up, and hope he replicates his performance from the first, just for a full 60 minutes, because that's something that we haven't quite seen from Daymud since earlier in the season. Sometimes he'll have a great finish like he did in that playoff clinching win against Vancouver. But aside from that, I think that dominant win against the Desert Dogs, who are still coming into their own being an expansion team, we haven't really seen the full potential of what Daymud can do in that.
Well, and I think you talk about the first half, and we talked about it last week, but it's very important that he doesn't have a slow start like he did in Calgary. I think that's kind of what threw him off his game is, we were able to try to stop for lack of better words, we were able to stop the bleeding for a little bit, but at some point in Calgary, it just got to the point where it was one goal after another, and he just didn't know what to do, honestly.
Yeah, from what I remember, did they subbed in McLeod in the second quarter, right?
Yeah, halfway through the second quarter.
Yeah, so hopefully he plays well enough to where Coach TK and the rest of the team has the confidence to let him play through any if there are any early lapses. Hopefully, just let him play through it and refocus and improve as the game goes on.
Well, and of course, defense is only half the game. We have to talk about the offense. Again, in that first game at Calgary, only scoring 5 goals in an entire game. I, I can't say that it was our best offensive outing. I think there were some good shots, and even the goals that we did make, it seemed like we knew what we were doing, but it just wasn't enough, and it wasn't consistent enough.
Yeah, and he's obviously still a vital part of our offense, but it is kind of telling that Caputo led the team in goals in that 5-12 loss the first game because he's mainly there to set picks, open other guys up, and you really need a guy like him to help set guys like Malcolm and Donville and Crawford up, either to make plays or score by themselves. So it just with Caputo, you're always going to get the effort there, but you really need the other guys to play sharp in order to combat the Roughnecks. Not only their aggressive and solid defense, but their elite goaltender in Del Bianco.
Well, and you were at that last game against, at home against Calgary. I mean, did you feel like the offense just felt a little bit more in sync that game at least?
Oh yeah, it was absolutely a lot more in sync, especially early on. Now you did have contributions from Josh Medeiros and Tony Malcolm in transition. I think both Gaucher and Caputo later on got goals off of either offensive rebounds near the net or broken plays, which does seem to kind of be their specialty whenever they're in there. But yeah, Donville, Crawford, and Malcolm, although they might have not had some of the eye-popping numbers that they've had in previous games, they were a lot sharper and their passes were crisp. They got plenty of shots on goal, especially Malcolm. I believe he might have hit double digits. Yeah, he had 11 shots on goal that last game. So even though not everything was going in, it's good to put that kind of pressure on the Calgary defense and keep them guessing.
Well, and I think that was something telling of that second game compared to the first game is the first game it just seems like we would get a shot off and then we wouldn't get any rebounds or get any second chances. I think we had a few shots where we were able to reset the shot clock and have maybe a second chance to score, but it just never worked in our favor. Whereas the second game you saw it was almost night and day. You saw players going after the ball more, as you said, getting loosies, trying to get those rebounds, trying to get shots off as much as possible. And so that's something I think looking at this playoff game, that's something the offense needs to keep doing. And I think it's something that they found in that last home game loss that hopefully they can keep going into this game.
Just like what Damien did in net, you just need to put together a full 60-minute effort. And we played their offense pretty tight that first game, which definitely helped out. They had buckets or they had goals in transition and I think off of dunks. So what you would call non-traditional goals by Calgary until they were able to do what we couldn't and refocus in the second half and then pull away. But yeah, it was still plenty to grow on. And with those two games under our belt, I think I'm hoping that this third game will be the best that we've played against Calgary this season.
Well, and that's what I hope to see. I mean, you just mentioned it before. It's hard to shut out a team that you faced, especially multiple times like this. Using a kind of off-brand example, so the XFL game was this last weekend, and the Arlington Renegades, who didn't really have a very good record, barely got into the playoffs, but they had lost against their opponent twice, and really, really bad fashion both times against the Houston Roughnecks, and all they had to do was win one game to move on. And guess what? That one game, that was their best offensive game they ever had. And so when it comes down to like a game like this where it's, loser goes home, uh, I think everybody is just wanting to play their best, to be honest.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny you bring that game up because I was actually watching the NBA playoff Nuggets Suns game this weekend, and on the smaller TVs, they had the San Diego Colorado game, and next to it,
Yes,
they had the Arlington and Houston XFL game.
nice.
So it was
Uh,
just kind of fun to see the different parallels between uh, each of these different pro sports getting into their playoffs.
oh yeah, yeah. And actually, speaking of XFL for 2 seconds, somebody in the XFL group that I follow posted about the lacrosse game that night being on
Oh, nice.
ESPN, and they're like, "Hey, don't forget to give them some love." And I'm like, "Yeah, hey man, come on, let's get some fans going in there." But
Nice.
so going into this game, I mean, I know there isn't just one thing that will win or lose a game. But for you, is there one thing that might be the big difference maker in this game?
I would say mainly Damian putting together a full game. Beyond that, we've shown that we're able to limit Calgary's transition opportunities. I don't know that Del Bianco got maybe one or two assists in transition against us in the two games that we played together. Zach Courier did have one of his trademark, just I think off a loose. He just ran it in and got an unassisted goal this last game. But for the most part, we were able to limit their transition. Unfortunately, when their 5-on-5 picked up, we weren't able to combat that. And then that in turn allowed their transition game to kind of flow a bit. So they're a team that you could say this about a lot of teams, but against these elite teams especially, you really have to play above average on in all facets, whether it's your 5-on-5 defense, your transition defense, having your offense play crisp and cohesively, and then Daymute obviously in net doing what he does. So there's just so many elements. That being said, I do think Calgary is a better matchup for us than San Diego just based on their team makeup. They're a bit more similar to us in that they're 5-on-5 offense. They've got like a guy like Jesse King who's kind of similar to Will Malcolm and what
Mm-hmm.
he brings to the table, but it's not that four-headed monster of Dane Dobby, Stotts, Curtis Dixon, Merrill on over in San Diego. So in that sense, I think because we're a bit more similar to them in makeup, we might have a better idea of how to combat their strengths and weaknesses.
Right, and same for me. I don't think there's maybe one person or one player that could be the difference maker. For me, I'm gonna go offensive side. We saw it last game. Gaucher, Donville, Malcolm, Crawford, when they're all playing well and they're all, that offense is really just working to the best of their ability, there's really no stop for them. I mean, even Donville's up for Rookie of the Year. I mean, him contributing. We've talked about Gaucher contributing. Malcolm, like I said, was having an MVP season at one point. It's those players, and especially on offense, that's gonna, for me, be more of a difference maker. I think our defense. I think Damoud, even if he starts out rough, I think he can settle down. It all depends on if the offense can rise to the occasion and say, what happened here in Calgary, 4 weeks ago, we can't let that happen again.
I would absolutely love to see I imagine it'd probably be either Will Malcolm or John Donville, maybe even Crawford, have a double-digit point game. Because I think Malcolm, that probably helped put him in the MVP conversation earlier on in the season when he had one of those. So if they can play that effectively, and then hopefully Medi and Tony Malcolm get their opportunities where they come, Hossakin and the rest of the defense is able to keep the pressure on Calgary's offense, good things will hopefully happen.
Well, and it's funny you bring up Medeiros. I mean, if he gets a chance, I feel like he's the kind of player who doesn't shy away from the spotlight. If he gets a chance to show off, I mean, I think he could be a good difference maker out there for the whole team.
No, he relishes that. And you can tell that he plays the same way whether we're on the road or at home. He'll be banging the glass, either firing our own fans up or agitating and playing villain to the road fans. So he's a he's the exact kind of spark that we need for the team.
Well, exactly, especially on like those transition goals. I mean, he just makes the team better out there. But well, I mean, we've done this every week. But what are your expectations for this game?
Hmm. I am. I think I'm optimistic, cautiously optimistic, but optimistic nevertheless. I think Panther City is going to finally put together a solid game against one of the elite teams in this league. We beat Colorado earlier this year. I think that was the only team that we beat that is playoff bound because we lost both our games to San Diego, lost both of them to Calgary. Don't
Lost against
remember who.
Rochester.
Yeah, Rochester, and then Rochester. Oh, well, I guess we'll touch on their struggles later.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think this is where we kind of get the proverbial monkey off our back and really show that, hey, we're not to be trifled with. We're here and we've made the playoffs and we plan to stick around for more than just the game. There it's such a fun matchup to me because there are just so many elite players at similar positions for both teams. Obviously, Del Bianco and Damute are both of the two of the best goalies in the league. Zach Currier and Josh Medeiros, two of the best transition players for somewhat similar yet different reasons. In terms of, it's crazy that Currier is able to rank so highly in defensive stats while also getting quite a few goals and assists. So, but all that being said, I think this is going to be a great opportunity for our team to show what they're capable of when they're playing full strength and everything's clicking.
Yeah. So when was it? It was actually the Calgary game. I had hyped up that game because it was the first. Well, I'm sorry, the second featured game as NLL, game of the week. The first one, of course, was in Las Vegas, where we just kind of, you know, stomped on the new guy in town.
Right.
um, but the second game where they finally got highlighted in Calgary, I thought that this is a great opportunity to have a spotlight on this team and for them to come out and show what's up. And unfortunately, they didn't show up that game. I don't think they do that this time. I think, like you said, uh, you can say cautiously optimistic. I'm going to be optimistic. I'm going to say that Panther City use that momentum. I am sticking with that storyline. I am New York Giants against Patriots storyline all the way. Uh, I am saying they used that loss in the last week to learn what they needed to tighten up on, to learn how they can attack this team and figure out how to win. Uh, and pretty much come out. I'm going to say like a blowout or anything like that. No, that's not going to happen with a team like Calgary. But I am going to say it's going to be a game where both of our sides hopefully are playing some of the best ball they played all year, and even if it is an extremely tight and close game again like the last one, I think we have the knowledge and I think we have the attitude to pull off an upset and get the win. But I mean that kind of leads us into, of course, yeah, win or loss. For me, I'm gonna go with a win, and if I was to guess a score, I'm gonna guess that both offensive ends is just. I don't know how to describe it. I feel like our defense will be good for a while, but at some point something's going to happen, and our both of our offenses are just going to trade back and forth. So let's see. We lost that game. What was it?
12.
12.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I'm going to say we hold them to 13, but that we pull out 15.
Wow. 15
And
against Christian Del Bianco.
I'm gonna say that's by accident too, because I think our offense can do it. I feel like Calgary's the kind of team that might panic late in the game and maybe pull Del Bianco and try to get that offensive struggle, and that's where we could
Hmm.
maybe possibly take advantage. And you know what? Hey, if Damoud gets a shot on goal, I'll take it. But yes, I think our offense at some point in that game will decide, hey, it's go time. Coach TK has been saying that all year. It is go time, and we are at the moment now where it's win or go home, and they won't have a choice, and they'll show up.
As you've said, in terms of momentum, everything's pointing in the right direction against Calgary. Our first game against them was meh. Our second game was down to the wire. So that's another reason why I like them more than San Diego, where our first game against them was pretty close, but our second one was a blowout at home. So that being said, I do think the third time's a charm and that Panther City will get past Calgary. I'm going to give the defenses and goaltenders a bit more credit. I don't think the score is going to quite be as high as you're predicting.
Okay.
So I'm thinking 13-11.
Ooh.
Panther City.
Still that 2-goal deficit, so that's good. That's good. I mean, you never know with playoffs. You just honestly never know what's going to happen. I mean, we had that one guy on Instagram. I mean, he even still is saying stuff on Instagram about like, oh, Owen showed up, and you're like, Owen who? Ha ha. Like we didn't win a game against them. Yeah, I get it, but
I mean, small sample size, but sure,
right. But that's what I'm saying. Like this game isn't going to be like any games that came before it this year. It's got a completely different atmosphere. It's got a completely different attitude, and I feel like we can rise to the occasion this time. With speaking of which, I mean, if we do win, depending on how this weekend goes, we might end up with some home games at some point if we do
that
get
would
this
be
one.
that would be awesome. And it's funny because en route to their title last year, well, we mentioned it earlier, but the Colorado Mammoth did beat Calgary in that first round.
Mm-hmm.
So who knows? There might be some. If we're lucky, they might have some sort of mental block to be like, "Come on, don't mess this up."
Well, yeah, they got to be wondering about not just last year, but just like years in the past where they've gotten so close just to get knocked out. So, yeah, we'll see what happens. But you're cautiously optimistic. I am very optimistic. I hope that this is probably the best game that we can see from Panther City. Well, while Panther City does get ready for their first ever playoff game, we did want to touch. There are 3 other games going on this weekend. And to decide who moves on in the postseason, and kind of just for fun, I wanted to kind of take a quick look at those games and just give our quick thoughts on who we think might win, and just take a look at who might be our future opponents depending on how the playoffs play out. But the first game, I mean, I'll look out east. The defending East champions, Buffalo Bandits, they take on the Rochester Nighthawks. Buffalo's been pretty dominant all year. You can't say they haven't. I mean, they pretty much got that first spot a few weeks into the season and haven't looked back since.
Yeah, Rochester. On the flip side, Rochester hung around and they really surprised everyone earlier in the season. But for whatever reason, whether due to guys being banged up or just running out of a little gas, they couldn't sustain it over the entire season, and which is why they fell all the way from competing for that 1 seed all the way to number 4. Now that's not to say they're a bad team by any means, but it was kind of a letdown of a finish for them, and I think that'll probably have some carryover into their matchup with Buffalo, especially knowing like, this could have been us.
Yeah, well, and I believe Rochester was like one of the last teams undefeated going to start the season, and yet everybody, like you said, they surprised everybody, and then they just kind of fell off a little bit there, and in the season as strong as they wanted to, but they had enough early wins to get that playoff spot. I mean, I guess looking at this game, I really don't expect much from Rochester. I think they could probably keep it close for most of the game, but I think Buffalo is just too strong of a team, to be honest. They've taken on all sorts of opponents, and they've won a ton of games this year. So I think Buffalo kind of moves on into that one. What do you think?
I would agree. They've got the reigning MVP. Possible this would make him a back-to-back and overall 3-time MVP in Dane Smith. Plus, they've got Matt Vinken goal, I think he led the league in saves this year, as well as goalie wins. And Rochester, they looked pretty darn good when they faced Panther City earlier this year. Mm-hmm. And then after that, maybe they let off the gas a little bit or started getting beaten up by the Eastern schedule. But yeah, I'm expecting... I think Buffalo's going to win that by at least 4 goals.
Yeah. I mean, it just seems like they're the type of team that if somebody's keeping close to them, uh, they're just the kind of team that can turn it on in the fourth quarter and pull away. Staying out east, the Toronto Rock take on the Halifax Thunderbirds. The Halifax Thunderbirds, who squeaked into the playoffs at the very last week, this last week against Georgia. I mean, I'll be honest. I think we had talked about back and forth. I was really pulling for Georgia just because that you want to talk about an underdog story, like starting out with what one win maybe or zero wins for so many weeks, and then for them to be able to get in contention for the playoff at the very end, that would have been just like the great underdog story for their season. But unfortunately, they did lose against Halifax. Halifax takes the spot, taking on the Toronto Rock. Toronto Rock has been a pretty solid team as well, although they've had a lot of ups and downs this year.
Yeah, yeah, they were in the running for the one seed for a while with Buffalo. Both Toronto and Halifax, maybe Halifax more so than Toronto, seems to you'll see them win by more than 10 in some games and then lose by that same margin. So even though both teams have had some of their inconsistencies, I think the Rock are a bit more consistent to an at times dominant level, whereas the Thunderbirds, yeah, they're a bit too Jekyll and Hyde. It's nice that they made the playoffs. We were cheering for the Swarm, as you mentioned, but yeah, I'm under the impression that the Rock will take care of business at home. Granted, I will preface this. I think these are two of the few teams where I wasn't able to catch a game of this season. So that's just going off of what I've seen from the box scores afterwards, as well as the overall record.
Yeah, and same here. I mean, I haven't really seen a whole lot of Toronto Rock. I think the only Toronto Rock game that I saw some of was when they went against Buffalo earlier on in the season. But that was about the only game that I saw of theirs. But again, it seems like they were kind of in that 1-2 spot, fighting back and forth with Buffalo for the most part of the year. So, and with Halifax, again, like you said, they were last minute kind of addition. So I feel like they're just happy to be there. Uh, which again, the playoffs, like we keep saying with Panther City, anything can happen. Unfortunately, I think Toronto could probably take care of business with them, get the win there. Well, and then of course that looks brings us back out west, where we have the San Diego Steels in the one spot taking on the defending NLL champion Colorado Mammoth, a Colorado Mammoth team who I I think I had mentioned it somewhere, either on Twitter or on Instagram at some point weeks ago, but they're getting hot at the right moment. And even though they lost against San Diego this last week, I mean, they got their wins and they got their team together towards the end of the season right when it counts.
Yeah, to make that near comeback against San Diego in California is really impressive. And to me, they're one of those low seeds that's not, it's deceptive how low their seed is because they didn't have, I think, Ryan Lee until after midway through the season. Once they did, they really started gelling together. They're the defending champions, and they've beaten this San Diego one seed that they've beaten. They were able to beat them last year, so it's kind of like they're used to being in these sort of situations. So I'm actually thinking that they're able to pull off the upset.
See, and I think you and I are on the same thought process with that. I honestly feel like Colorado is right now hitting the stride that they did hit last year going into the playoffs, and that's a dangerous team. When their goalie is playing on top of his game and that offensive is going off, yeah, like you said, they came back against San Diego. Yeah, San Diego maybe wasn't having all their starters at the end, so that might be a thing. But at the same time, uh, if anybody's going to beat San Diego in San Diego in a one and done type of situation, I think Colorado has the ability to do it. So yeah,
Absolutely.
I'm going to take Colorado to win as well. Which, as we talked about, if they were to win and we were to win, that would put us in the higher seed and give
Yes.
us home field advantage in a three best out of three playoff series. What what the heck?
Yeah, that would be pretty cool. Now, Do you know whether it's a one home, one away, then one home, or is it the first two home?
No,
Let's,
it's split. So yeah,
okay.
like if we were to start out, it would be one home and then one in Colorado and then one away, or one back home. Uh, which I don't know if that goes in our favor.
Yeah, well,
I,
I mean, yeah, well, let's not get too ahead of ourselves,
right.
but yeah, it's kind of nice to think over the possibilities in terms of getting more games in Fort Worth.
Yeah, for sure. And I think a playoff game in Fort Worth would be huge for this team. I think it would it would give the team the ability and the chance to really have that crowd that they wanted all year. Playoffs, it's different. So when you have a playoff team, you can get those fans in there, get the house packed, and again, you just never know what's going to happen in the playoffs. But yeah, we'll have to wait and see how this weekend plays out. I honestly feel, are we the first game this weekend?
We are the last, actually.
Oh, we're the last.
Yeah,
Okay.
they're doing let's see. Friday it starts with Halifax versus Toronto,
Okay.
then Colorado versus San Diego. Saturday, Rochester plays Buffalo, and then we play Calgary.
Well, I hate to admit, but I'm probably gonna have to keep an eye on that Colorado game just to see how that plays out.
Yeah.
But speaking of, watching the game, uh, I believe the team, or we met some people, during the season who've been doing watch parties. I don't think they put one together yet, but I'm pretty sure they're gonna have one.
Yeah, we'll have to keep an eye on that I think it's a meetup group that they have because
Hmm.
they were not only doing tailgates pregame but also hanging out post game after each home game. So yeah, hopefully we've seen comments on social media of people
Hmm.
asking about watch parties. So surely there's bound to be at least one going on come next weekend.
Well, either that or I mean, even if the team wants to put together like, hey, we're all gonna meet here and we're all gonna root for them. I mean, that would be pretty cool as well. So,
Yeah.
shout out to Panther City if you guys are listening. If you want to put something together, we would appreciate it.
Yes.
but
Yeah. Absolutely. Even
but
opening up the they open up Dickies and project it on the
yeah,
big
there you
screen,
go,
kind of
there you
like with
go.
some other
Well,
sports.
I think I just saw that online just a few like this last week. There was another team that was away and they showed the game on the projector, but they also had, it was for hockey, and they had a
Okay.
projection of the players on the field too, or on the court, or not the court,
Nice.
the rink, duh. um but yeah, and it was just like you could watch it, but it was like $5 to get in, and you just
Hmm.
like you would be watching a game. But no, I think that would be cool too. Now obviously Dickies Arena kind of has their own schedule, so
Yeah. Hmm.
it'd be hard to like go around that. But no, I obviously you and I had talked about, wherever a watch party is or if stuff's going on, we would like to try to make it, and hopefully that'll work out. I mean, looking at this weekend, I mean, what are your final thoughts?
It's just fun. This will be the first year for both of us to have experienced the NLL playoffs. Not, I think overall, because last year I didn't have ESPN Plus yet, so I wasn't able to catch Colorado's Cinderella run or any of the other games that happened. So yeah, we are pumped for multiple reasons, and especially because we get to cheer for our home team.
Yeah, I mean, whenever you have a team in the playoffs, it's always just like, hey, this is going to be fun, and we hope it. I mean, I don't want to say that we might lose, but even with a loss, I mean, this team is going in the right direction. And, if we lose, we lose, and we come back stronger next year, and we take that next step. So, as we get ready, of course, for Panther City's winner go home playoff game this weekend, we can only hope that this is the right direction towards that championship. If not this year, hopefully in the coming years. But of course, we want to thank everybody for listening. Be sure to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Once again, I am Nicholas,
And I'm Andy.
and we won't see you. We might see you next week, but we're gonna end with "Let's go Panther City."
Yeah, let's go. Thank y'all so much for your support.
Yeah. Have a good night, guys.
Cheers.